questions here, but I really mean it. Ask me anything, ideally about poker. If you have questions, just type them into the chat, and even after the recording, because I can answer them next time. But I have a few juicy ones. So for example, how much can you expect to earn playing 1-2 or 1-3? And is variance higher in live cash games or online? Also, is it worth playing the WSOP Main Event if you're a winning player? So we'll get to all these questions. But let's kick off with a question from one of my students, and he asked, is a rake of 5% capped at 100 beatable if you play 1-3? So you play 1-3, the rake is 5%, which doesn't sound too bad, but then it is capped at 100, so that's just over 33 big blinds. And I would say this rake is absolutely not beatable, unfortunately. So where I play in London, we have 5% capped at 10 or 11. Sometimes they take another pound or even 152 for promotions, and that one's pretty beatable. In the US, I know they often have 10% capped at 5 or 6, and then $1 or $2 for promotions. That one's also beatable at any stake, but I can assure you that if it's capped at 100 or uncapped or anything like that, that will not be beatable, unfortunately. And I know there are games, especially in France and Germany, where they do not have any cap, no matter what stakes you play. Those games are also absolutely not beatable. Next question, can you make money playing poker on YouTube? Well, I mean, I don't know what you mean by making money playing poker or making money from YouTube, because making money playing poker on YouTube, I would say yes, if you play high enough stakes and you're good enough, you can definitely make money with winning. But I think the question was more geared towards whether you can actually make money from YouTube with adverts and other things. And the question there is not that easy to answer. So actually, yeah, it is easy. Yes, you can make money, but the question is then how much money can you make a living from that? And that is a very different one. So if you have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours on YouTube, then you can start earning money with your content. So I have now finally reached this. So thank you everyone for supporting me on this and subscribing to the channel and watching my content. This has enabled me to monetize channel. However, we're not talking about retiring and getting rich, well, especially not at the beginning. So yes, if you're Mr. Beast and you have 250 million viewers for every one of your videos, then yes, you can make quite a lot of money. If you're starting out playing poker, doing some play and explains, like if I were to do that, play and explain now for an hour, I might make maybe $5 with that. So yeah, you be the judge of that, whether that is a good hourly rate or not. Of course, if you make money with the poker and then can make a few bucks on the side with streaming on YouTube, that can be favorable. But most people who stream any games online will not really make any significant money with that. So I hope this answers the question. How do you play against maniacs is the next question. That's also a very interesting one, and there is no one answer fits all to this one, but in general you have to consider, okay, so what do maniacs do? What is their propensity to make mistakes? Is it to fold too much? Is it to call too much? Is it to raise too much? Is it to barrel too much? And so on. Well, I think pretty much they raise too much and they barrel too much. So if those are their mistakes, then what can you do to exploit them? Well, first of all, don't start with marginal hands if you know that a maniac is behind you and you'll get 3-bet there. So marginal hand, I mean something like King 10 offsuit, and you're pretty certain that you'll get 3-bet. Well, yeah, you could call and then maybe you hit and then you can hold on for dear life, but that's not a good strategy. So what I would do there is I would really play a tighter range if I have someone like that behind me. Or if he opens before me and I don't have squeeze happy players behind me, I might call with speculative hands. Or even with really good hands, because, and that's the next exploit, post-flop, if he's a true maniac, he will continue barreling. He'll barrel the flop, then the turn, maybe even the river. So what that means is you basically have to trap them. So that's easier said than done, because trapping means you have a really good hand, and I don't know about you, but I don't tend to flop sets all the time, or two pair, or straights, or flushes, or something like that. So then that's quite easy. Just don't start raising them early on. If you have a monster, just let them hang themselves. However, if you only have a weak top pair or second pair or something like that, that's where it gets really tricky, because you have two options. You can either just give up and let him have the pot, or you can call him down with your top pair of second pair. Now, against maniacs, this is actually the exploit that you should do. Just call them down and be a real calling station against them. But the downside to that is obviously that you will quite often, not quite often, but you will sometimes, sorry, this is how I should phrase it, you will sometimes lose a lot of money if he has a better hand than you, because just because he's a maniac and he raises every hand doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything. So I recently read that funny quote where it said that just because you're paranoid, that doesn't mean that they're not after you. This is a bit like that here. So just because they're a maniac doesn't mean that they never have anything. So they could well have a better top pair than you, or two pair, or bottom set or something like that, and then you call down and you lose a big pot. That's the danger of it. So it's always, they're connected to very high variance to play against a maniac. Very different to a nit. A nit is usually, you always play small pots. Against a maniac, you tend to play big pots with marginal hands, which is normally something you would want to avoid. However, you can't avoid it against maniacs unless you just allow them to run you over, which is not a great strategy. Next one. So this is a longer one. What about when my local casino only offers 2-5 games? They used to have 1-2 and 2-5 before, but now they only have the 2-5 games these days. So assuming that some percentage of the 1-2 players will have transitioned to the 2-5, maybe with a 50% buy-in, because they just don't want to buy in too deep. This guy says, I'm an online cash player and I'm considering to give it a shot at 2-5 with 60 big blinds as a buy-in to see what it's like, and what do you think? Well, a few things there. So I think normally, I had that video recently where I said that sometimes 1-2 is actually better to play than 2-5, because all the good players move to 2-5 and then you can play against a weaker player pool at 1-2. Now, you don't have that option anymore. There is only one game. And the thing is, whether that game is 1-2 or 2-5 shouldn't make a massive difference, because it is the lowest game. I have been to casinos where the lowest game was 2-4, and those games were much softer than my 1-2 games in London. And the reason is because the weakest player will naturally gravitate towards the lower stakes. That's not always the case. Some of them with a lot of money will want to test themselves against good pros and so on, and they will try to play the 5-10 or even higher. But generally speaking, a lot of these games, the lower stakes games, do attract these players that are a bit weaker. So that's not bad news then if there is no 1-2 anymore, because it means that you have the same players, maybe not exactly the same players, but some of those players that still play in the 2-5 game now. And if you could, for example, play against exactly the same players at 1-2 or 2-5, I would rather pick playing 2-5 against them. So, what does that mean? That means that you actually should make more money in theory. But the other consideration here is the fact that it's higher stakes, and it's more than doubling the stakes from 1-2 to 2-5. And the problem here is a bankroll one. So if you're not bankrolled for 2.5, that can be an issue. So that's basically my answer to the question. If you're bankrolled for 2.5, then be happy about it and play these games. If you're not, then I would say you should try to get the bankroll together and then play that. That said, the 60 big blind buy-in is actually not a bad idea. Just try that out, take some shots and see how it goes. And if you lose too much in that, just try to grind it in online games or something else that would give you the money. So something else, I mean something that's not poker related. And then once you have that bankroll, then give it a real try. But I think playing 2.5, especially in these conditions, assuming the rake is beatable, that's a much better game than pretty much anything that you can have online. So I see that now I have a few people saying hi here. Carlos says hi, found your content a few weeks ago and got great value from it. Appreciate, thank you very much. John Smith says audio is a bit off. That is not great. Sorry about that. I don't really know what I can do at this point. What do you mean by a bit off? Can you still hear and understand me? That would be very helpful to know. And Salmon Shark says, played at the Empire a year ago, was visiting from the States. I will reach out next time I'm visiting London. Yes, please do so. Thank you very much. He's a live NL pro from California. Definitely let me know. At the moment I'm playing a lot at the Empire. I'm doing the cash race again this month, so I have to accumulate between 100 and 120 hours. I got 99 as of today, so almost there now. But yeah, come and say hi at the Empire when you see me there, but also at any other casino, or if you just come to London, just let me know in advance and we can maybe meet up at one of the casinos. Okay, so no questions yet from the chat, but they might trickle in. So the next one's a very interesting one, and that is, how do you adapt to straddles? So how do you adapt to those? There are different types of straddles. I mainly play and I've mainly seen the under the gun straddle. So that is the 1-2 game, for example. The next player who would be under the gun pays a blind $5, or usually it's double the big blind, and that's like a third blind, and that player gets to act last. And then there is a Mississippi straddle, that's where the straddle happens on the button, and then there are some games where you can basically straddle from any position. I'm not going to go into details about all of these. I will just talk about the under the gun straddle because that's the most common one. So first of all, you have to think about what does it mean if you straddle. Let's say you play to 5 and now there is a straddle to 10. So this means if you bought in for $500 at a 2-5, normally you buy in for 100 big blinds. But now, because there is another blind there, the straddle, the blind, that one's 10, so your 500 is now only 50, well, it's not 50 big blinds, it's 50 straddles, but you have to treat the straddle as if it were a big blind. So that means that you're just much shallower at this point. So effective stacks, stacks to pot ratios, all of this will just get smaller, which means that you will want to play a more high card heavy game, and you will want to tighten up. So the other adaptation that you have to make here, the other adjustment is, now for any position that you are, you're basically one further removed. So for example, in a normal 2-blind game, if you're the cutoff, there are 3 players to act behind you. If there is a straddle, now there are 4 players to act behind you, because there is the button, the small blind, the big blind, and the straddle. That means you have to have a slightly tighter opening range. Now I wouldn't go crazy with the adjustment here, but I would go slightly tighter because there is just one more player who could come over the top and raise you off your hands. So those are the main adjustments. In general, people tend to so some people, I should say, tend to over-defend their straddles, which means that if you're in a later position, you might even get away with raising lighter, but that's not just a point-blank adjustment. That's something that you have to figure out once you know how someone reacts. There's often an ego battle going on. It's like, why are you attacking my straddle and things like that. There are just players who just can't fold their straddle, which I think is a bit silly, but anyway. Yeah, but these are the main adjustments, and I'm just going to answer a question, although no one asked it, about what happens with straddles, like whether you should straddle or not. And my answer to that is usually it's better not to straddle. But I know some pros who actually do it, and they justify it in 2 or 3 ways even. They say it's kind of like giving something back. And the second thing is that they want to encourage recreational players to straddle, because then again the pros have the advantage. And the third reason is also just to make the games bigger, because good players feel more comfortable in bigger pots than recreational players do, so they have an additional edge there. However, they might have that edge, but they are usually out of position, and they are usually there with a weaker range because they just paid that straddle in advance, and also sometimes they just waste the straddle because they don't have a playable hand. So that's the downside of it, and that's why I personally don't really like straddling. The only exception for me is if the table agrees to do a round of straddles, because then everyone is in the same boat, and then I'm fine with it. But usually you are at a small disadvantage if you straddle, and also you're at a small disadvantage if you are in the blinds and then there is a straddle. So that's quite annoying if there's only one person straddling at the table, and it's always the guy who sits to your direct left. But yeah, all you can do then is try to move to a different seat if one becomes available, or indeed to a different table. Yeah, now the question you've all been waiting for: how much can you expect to win playing 1-2 or 1-3? Well, that also depends on the rake structure, I would say. Well, in general, you are looking at about 10 big blinds per hour. So at 1-2 there would be 20, at 1-3 there would be 30. But it really depends on the rake structure, and obviously also on your skill level, on everybody else's skill level, on the time of the day you play. Not that the actual time of the day really has an impact, although funnily enough, in one of my casinos where I play, it does have an impact, because from 6 p.m. onwards you pay an extra rake for another promotion, so that will have a small negative impact on the win rate there as well. But yeah, usually later in the evening, at night, games become a little softer than late mornings or something like that, and therefore your win rate can be higher. But I would say on average, if you're a really good player, you could expect to make around 20 at a 1-2 per hour and 30 at a 1-3 per hour, and then moving up to 2-5 depending on the stack sizes. If you buy in, everyone buys in for 200 big blinds or so, or even more, that can even be more than 50, maybe 60, 70 per hour, because the rake there as a percentage, or as in big blinds, is just lower. So that means that your winnings increase a little bit by that. Next one: what's the best poker book for a beginner? Well, that is an excellent question, but it also depends on where you are in your poker journey and where you want to go next, and also in general, like for example, if you're a tournament player, a cash game player, a live player, an online player, heads up player, and so on. Like, I can tell you that for me, as a live cash game player, by far the most important book has been Ed Miller's The Course. And it's quite old now. I think he published it in 2016 or something like that. This is pretty much when I started taking poker a lot more seriously. And I would still say, I just recently flicked through it again, I would still say that that is one of the best books to learn if you want to play live cash game poker. Now, that doesn't have any GTO in it or anything too mathematical. That's really just exploitative poker for live low stakes. And if live low stakes is what you would like, then that one I would still say is amazing. I'm not affiliated to Ed or anything, although he has helped me a lot in my career as a poker player, but I've never met him directly, so only know him through his books. But pretty much all his books are excellent, and that one was really the one that helped me a lot. And therefore I would say that one is still one that I would recommend. But there are a lot of other books, but I just don't want to and can't go into too many details because it would have to be depending on what your personal needs are. And if you have that question, you can just ask me at some point and maybe I can then guide you towards something else. But yeah, as I said, for live cash games, that one I still think is the best one to go for. Next one, is it worth playing the WSOP Main Event if I'm a winning player? Well, I have played it, as some of you might know, and I would say in some ways it's totally worth it, but there are a few buts. So the thing is, depending on what else you do in terms of poker. So for me, I said it was a once in a lifetime thing. I just wanted to play it, and I said, if I just lose the $10,000, then so be it. It's just the experience of it, because it really does feel like you're a tennis player at the Grand Slam in Wimbledon or US Open, Australian Open, French Open, something like that, and you're in there, you're having a game, as it were, every other day, and then you have a day off where you can rest, where you can train, prepare, study, whatever. I thought it was amazing, but I also made it to day 4, I min cashed, so I thought it was an absolutely incredible experience. And I think that every poker player who can afford it should do that, because it is really amazing. However, now if you are a low stakes player and you play 1-2 or 1-3 or even 2-5 or even 5-10 really, and you grind out between $20 an hour and say $80 an hour or something like that, 10 grand is a lot of money. Now even if you're a tournament player and you play $500 or $1,000 buy-ins, 10 grand is still a very different beast. And in terms of bankroll, that can put a big hole in your bankroll. And therefore, I'm not convinced that that is a great idea for someone who has bankroll issues to play the tournament. It's a different story if you can get staked in some ways. Then there is no real downside to it, then I would always play it. And I would love to play it again, but yeah, for me it's that consideration now. I've done it, I would love to do it, but 10,000 when I normally play 1-2, 1-3 and a little bit of 2-5, it's just really not justifiable. That's just such a big chunk. Where I would have to play for so long to get that back. And also the thing is, like, if you are a winning player, yes, in theory you have an edge there, so you have a positive return on investment. However, you would have to play the tournament for like 100,000 years coming to realize your equity in that one. And my guess is that none of you will be around for the next 100,000 years, as sad as it is. But unfortunately, our mortality puts an end point to that, and therefore I think we should not necessarily try to play that if you have bankroll concerns. But if you have another job and poker is your hobby and you have that on your bucket list, then by all means go for it, because it is an absolutely incredible experience. Is variance higher in live cash games or online? And that is one where I have a different opinion to most players, because the general the advice would be, or the general answer would be, it's absolutely a lot higher online than it is live. And those players, those people are not wrong. However, it depends what you compare. So if I say that someone who has the same win rate live and online, which I realize is very hard to have, but if you were to have that, then live poker variance is much higher than online poker variance, and that is for a few factors. And the main one is multi-way pots, especially at 1-2. If you go 5 or 6 ways to a flop and you have pocket aces, then you're still kind of an underdog to actually win that hand. Your hand is the most likely one to win, but the other ones combined are more likely to win than you. And that just doesn't happen that much online. Online, if you have pocket aces and someone calls you, you still have around 80-85% chances of winning that pot. And that, I think, is a big thing for live poker that increases variance. And the other thing is straddles. We talked about them earlier. It's just if the stack to pot ratios get reduced and the effective stacks compared to the blinds are reduced, which is what happens through straddles, then variance will naturally shoot up. But of course, normally for someone who has the win rate of say 10 big blinds an hour, which is more like 35 to 40 big blinds per 100 hands in a live game, and then if you compare that to someone who has a 2 big blind per 100 hands win rate online, then obviously variance for the online player will be much higher, because 2 big blinds per 100 hands is just so tiny that that player will just have a lot higher fluctuations than the live player, because with 40 big blinds per 100 hands, even if you run bad for a while, or if you run like God for a while, that will still only be like 20 or 25 or 30 big blinds up and down per 100. So that is why overall it's still kind of like online has the higher variance, but if you compare at the same win rates, then live variance is much higher. What should I eat before a long poker session? Someone asked. And that is a very good one, because we're coming up to the WSOP, so that is quite good to know for that. And you're in luck, because I have just recorded a whole podcast episode with an expert on this topic, and I've also made a smaller, more concise video where we go through all of that. I can quickly say it is a balanced diet that you should eat. However, there are a few things that you have to take into account, especially also when you eat and what kind of snacks to have with you. But I'm not going to answer that question now, because that video is coming out within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So just watch out for it, and you will get all the information that you need. Okay, if you call a 3-bet with a suited connector, what does the stack to pot ratio have to be? So I imagine what this means is, if you say you raise 7-6 suited, you get 3-bet. Can you call that 3-bet with 7-6 suited no matter how deep you are, or can you only call it if you're like super deep? And I looked that up earlier because I wasn't sure about this either, and I looked it up with 50 big blinds, and even at 50 big blinds deep, you would always call 7-6 suited or 5-6 suited, 8-7 suited, something like that, which sounds weird, because the smaller the SPR, the higher you want your cards to be. However, apparently Solver still likes to play a hand like 7-6 suited, and I think the reason is because such a hand is just not ever dominated. If he has ace jack, then jack 10 would be dominated. If he has ace queen, then queen jack would be dominated. But he doesn't have ace 7 or ace 6 normally when he 3-bets you, so that's why 7-6 suited and a few others of these lower to mid suited connectors are really playable, even when the SPR is quite low and the stacks are rather shallow. So thanks for watching and hope to see you next time.